Let's take a look at some of the new MIDI enhancements found within Cubase 11. We find that many of our customers will spend a tremendous amount of time inside of the MIDI key editor, and we wanted to make this a little easier to work with. As we work with our MIDI key editor, a lot of times one of the things that people want was different behavior for double clicking on notes. In previous versions, we could double click on notes and this would open up the note expression editor. And this would allow for independent MIDI CCs on independent notes. So they weren't channel based, but note based, kind of a precursor to MIDI 2.0. But some people wanted the ability to do more editing tasks without the ability to switch tools. So if we disable this function here, we can now double click on notes and a note will be deleted. So with one single tool, I could hold down my Alter Option key, and with my selection tool, I could draw notes in. With my Alter Option key, I could split. I could go to the edges and resize notes. And if I want to, again, double click to delete, we could do that as well. Working with MIDI controllers has also been improved. So if I want to double click, and we could enter in our MIDI controllers in a couple of different ways. We could choose to enter it in step or ramp. So if I wanted to have my MIDI controllers here and just have like my modulation ramp up or down, we could choose to select our controller here and we could just have that ramp up or down without having to enter in multiple events. As we click here, we could also say, okay, I want that to just jump to a particular area, or we could choose to have this particular curve. So if we want to do Bezier curves, so we can have a lot of flexibility with our editing and have more expressive MIDI CCs. Coming off to working with poly pressure has been very difficult in a lot of sequencers, where we could have in different controllers on different notes. So you could kind of press down on your MIDI controller if it's supported. So instead of kind of having to see all of your poly pressure kind of in one lane, we could now select the note, see our poly pressure settings on each selected note. So if I wanted to edit that, and I could also switch between our different notes that have poly pressure data and be able to switch back and forth very easily. Working with pitch bend has always been problematic because pitch bend can have, up to 16,384 divisions, and those could vary depending on how many semitones your instrument is set for. So if I wanted to now enable our semitone grid, we could see our pitch bend range kind of defined for us. We see this grid is 1 semitone up, 2 semitones up, and we would want to match this to your host instrument. So as I go to enter in my pitch bend data, we could see our time position as well as how flat or sharp we are on particular notes. So as I go to enter in pitch bend, I may want to say, okay, I think I'm returning to exactly in tune, but sometimes you're actually off a little bit, and then your MIDI will be kind of out of tune for the rest of the project. But now what we have is the ability to snap to the tone. So I can say when I click near the semitone, it's automatically just going to go directly to that semitone so that I know it's kind of working musically and will be in tune as I expect. Sometimes we wanted to make it a little easier for people to work with different musical harmony concepts. So we've incorporated a scale assistant. And what the scale assistant will allow us to do is Cubase can actually give us an analysis of a part and give us scale suggestions. These scale suggestions could also be derived from the chord track, or you could actually manually set the scale. And it's not just limited to simple major and minor scales. All of your modes will be covered, plus many different international scales. If you need to set up your own custom scale, you could click on Add Scale and actually just come here and define your own scale relationship and have that and have, your own custom scale defined for you. So very powerful to work with. Now, why do people want to do scale editing? Because as we do our edits on our project window, we could, with scale editing, we could come right over here and just move notes and make sure that that note is directly within the scale. And also, if I have notes that are kind of spread throughout, let's say just randomly put in, we could choose to quantize pitches, and that will automatically put in different scales. Let's say have these notes, we'll choose to quantize our pitches, and all of those notes will automatically just snap to be in key. So we could have all of our different snap editing. So I move my notes up and down. We could do that. We could enter notes in also in real time as well with our snap live input. And that could be really handy, especially if you're doing something like maybe like a harp glissando. So let's take a quick look at that. So I'll go to a harp part here. And we'll just double click, and I'm just going to put this into step entry mode. I'll set my rhythmic value to 16th note triplets, and I will just kind of just hit some notes. I'll just kind of sweep my controller. And now, as I've just entered those notes in, they're going to automatically work and be in the correct scale, and all the notes will work musically. So we'll take a quick listen to our harp glissando introduction. So you're going to be able to have those different types of scales and be able to, you know, have your live input work with it and be able to edit accordingly. Now, sometimes we may not want to see all of the notes that are available within the keyboard when we're doing editing. So we could actually kind of hide and filter different aspects out by clicking on this icon in the upper left-hand corner. We could choose to filter by notes that actually, pitches that have events, or pitches that are tied to the current scale. And if we didn't want that on, where you can see all of our notes, we could just toggle that behavior. Many of our customers would constantly kind of switch back and forth between the main project window and their MIDI key editor in full screen view, because they wanted to see particular different types of tracks and have that reference. So with Cubase 11, we've introduced the ability to have global tracks within our particular MIDI key editor. So if I wanted to see my video track, if I wanted to see the chord track, and many of these tracks you could actually edit and have the same functionality as if we were on the project window. So if I wanted to double click and change my chord or my scale, we could see our signature track. We could go to a ruler track, so I can see my SMPTE time code within the frames of my bars and beats. If I wanted to go to my tempo track and be able to kind of speed up and slow down accordingly, we could also have our transpose track, our arranger track, our signature track, and markers. So if I wanted to have my song structure, and we can now have an option to have the markers shown vertically throughout our different arrangement window or our MIDI editor. And even if I wanted to have a marker track that was just kind of dedicated to lyrics, at this point, if we wanted to navigate to specific lines, we could just kind of come over here and see when lyrics are coming on a particular marker track, because we could have up to 10 independent marker tracks here. So whatever you want to see, you could just kind of turn all these on and off. And if you wanted to hide them from view, one mouse click, you wanted to fold all those, you wanted to see all those options. So again, just making the workflow much faster. Many times we may want to take what is in our MIDI key editor and be able to print it out for notation. So Cubase 11's introduced some very exciting notation enhancements. So if I wanted to come over here, we could go to our scores menu, and we'll go to our score editor. So one of the additions is SMUFL font support, and this stands for Standard Music Font Layout. And what this is going to allow you to do is to have kind of the same look and fonts in Cubase as we have in Dorico, which is our notation program. So as we're kind of working and getting very used to looking at our score, if we needed to take it into Dorico for some more advanced notation, we're going to have that option and have consistent look and feel. So if we wanted to switch the fonts from the standard fonts in Cubase to the fonts used in Dorico, we could double click and open up our staff settings. We'll go to our project, and at this point we could just switch fonts by going to the Petaluma font. So I'll just hit apply, or we could go to the Bravura font, which is the default Dorico font. So again, now we can have this same consistent look and feel between the two different programs, so that if you're doing all your sequencing in Cubase and you need to print out your parts in Dorico, that you'll have that same consistency. One of the things that's also been added is sometimes getting into a lot of different settings for stuff that you see very easily on the score. Finding those different parameters can sometimes be tricky. So there's a new inspector that's been added that we could turn on by clicking in the upper right hand corner here. As we're working with this, we could say, and this will be context sensitive. So if I click on a bar line, I could see my different bar line options. If I wanted to click on my clef, I see all my clef options. I go to my key signature. I could change my key signature. If I wanted to go to notes, I could select a note. At this point, we could choose to have, different note head scaling. So if I wanted the notes to be smaller or much larger, we could adjust that. If I wanted to go to my dynamics, I could switch my dynamics. Let's go to text. We'll come over directly to our chords, and we'll have kind of the same chord definition that we're used to with the chord track. So instead of having to kind of, work with multiple windows and menus and have to search for different functions, we could just kind of select, and this will be context sensitive right here. Many times when we're in a score editor, we may want to do some simple edits like velocities or note lengths. And sometimes we toggle back and forth between the score editor and the key editor so we could edit different elements graphically. And to kind of mitigate this, we could actually look at what we call our overlay. So now as I hover over different notes or different bars, we get this little graphic overlay. So I'm going to switch this to velocity. And as I switch, instead of having to go back into the MIDI key editor, if I'm in my score and I realize that this note's just a little too loud or a little too soft, I can now just adjust, hover over the bar and be able to adjust the velocity here. If I wanted to adjust the actual length of the MIDI note, I could just come right here and click on the M, and this is how long the actual MIDI note lasts. And we have a D, and what D will allow us to do is to actually adjust the displayed notation, kind of the appearance, without affecting the actual length. So if I wanted this note to actually be a dotted quarter note and not have this eighth note rest, I could just simply extend that over, and that would change the appearance without affecting the actual length of the note. So the note would sound the same and play back on the instrument in the same way. So again, instead of having to worry about all that menu diving, we can see that the improvements in the score editor can really speed up your workflow. One of the great things that Cubase has also updated is going to be with the sampler track. So the sampler track is really intended to be a fast creative tool, and this kind of really can blend the world of working with virtual instruments and audio in a very creative way. So let's say we wanted to just add a sampler track. I could right click and let's add a sampler track. Now to get data in a sampler track, we could do it several different ways. We could drag from our media bay right over into the sampler track, from our project window into the sampler track, or even if it's just a particular, let's say, I have just a MIDI note here. So just a MIDI note that's going to a virtual instrument. I could just drag that right down. And now I have my sampler track that I could play. So we will go ahead and just kind of look at this particular sample track. If I wanted to normalize this to make the sample louder without having to go out into a dedicated audio processing, we can now just click right here and normalize the sampler. Excuse me. So now our sampler will play back louder. And if I wanted to choose different start or end positions, I could just select a range and choose different start and end positions. As we want to work with sampler, let's say if I wanted to do a new sampler track and just kind of drag an audio loop in there, such as my drum loop, we could have, you'll see that there's going to be more obvious distinctions when different parts are active or inactive. And we'll have different playback qualities. So we could choose to have this as standard, high quality, best, extreme, or vintage if you wanted to kind of model kind of, classic analog sampling drum machines. So I'm going to put this on the best quality. And as I play back the notes, so let's say I have my drum loop. And now if I play it up an octave, it's going to play it's going to play twice as fast and double the pitch. Or if I play down an octave, it's going to play at half the tempo. Now, if I wanted to play the same tempo regardless of the pitch, I could just enable audio warp. And as I enable audio warp, I could now just play different pitches and have the length or the tempo of the sample be exactly the same. So that makes it very easy and fast to work with. One of the inclusions in version 11 of Cubase with the sampler track is going to be the ability to slice samples. So we could base the slicing on transients, grids, transient plus grid, or manual. So here I'm going to do my transient. And once the slices are done, I could trigger each of the individual slices from my MIDI keyboard. But I also have this little MIDI icon here. Once I have this MIDI icon, I could drag this directly to my project window. And as I will just kind of take this particular sample part, I will double click and we could see that this is going to play back kind of the same exact loop here. So, but it's going to be kind of sliced and have its own MIDI information. So we'll play. And what I want to do now is I could just select that and very creatively just kind of get a variation of our drum loop just by moving my arrow keys to go up and down and change pitches as I see fit. And now we'll play it back and just give you an idea. So we may hear a little bit of the loop from the original. So very fast to take a loop, kind of slice and dice and reconstruct it in a very musical way with the same groove and the same sounds. And as we kind of work with different, it's not going to be limited just to, drum loops. You could do guitar solos or even voices. So let's say I wanted to play back this sample here.
No time to hesitate, it's all been done. You want to have it, you can't get enough.
And we could have an A and B setting. So if I wanted to go to the B setting, I could have kind of a variation of different edits. So I've manually kind of gone in here and sliced the audio in my B.
Let's get it. You wanna hesitate, enough, baby. You wanna get.
So you could just kind of come over here.
Hesitate enough, baby.
And you could just kind of do different vocal chops in a very creative way. So the little things like that just can, where someone's coming out with different ideas that you could just sculpt a new song based on that. We had a lot of people that also wanted to be able to work creatively with glides. So as we want to come here, we could have a glide mode, but we could also enable finger mode. So if I have my sample and I play it and I played it without the notes kind of being separated, where the first note is released before the second note, I could have that just play without a glide. But if I wanted to hold down the first note, it will glide, and we could set the speed of that glide with this particular knob here. Now you may notice that as I actually hit the particular glide and I hit the second note, that it's actually going to play back the second note from the beginning of the sample. But if I wanted to deactivate that mode, I'm going to click on this icon here, these 2/8 notes. So, and that way, when the second note hits, it continues to and changes the pitch based on that particular sample point. So I had a friend of mine just, I sent him a weird request. I said, hey, can you just sing a song that's just a melody that's one single note? And he gave me this.
I am singing this phrase for Greg so that he can get what he needs accomplished with this program. This is a recording.
So now I'm going to place this into kind of the monophonic mode here, and I enable the musical mode with the 2/8 notes. And now I'm just going to hold down the first note and just hit other notes and play a new melody.
I am singing this phrase for Greg so that he can get what he needs accomplished with this program. This is a recording.
So if someone is just singing different ideas, you could actually play it and be very musical and come up with new, fresh concepts and, again, kind of have that spark of creativity. As we're working with our different samples, let's go back to our synthesizer sound. Let's say I want to change different filters and kind of sculpt this particular sound. So as we do this, we can enable our filter section, and we could have up to 6 different filter types and multiple filter shapes. So what I want to do now is kind of sculpt the sound, and I will I also have the ability to come over here and have a just the MIDI key follow. So what we could do is, as the note is lower in pitch, the filter will kind of be more closed, and as we play higher, so that will kind of open up the filter depending upon the pitch. One thing that people wanted was the ability to see and have multiple LFOs. So I will just kind of take a look at our sample, and we could click on the modulation here. Now, what's kind of cool about this is, as I adjust even my filters, we could see this directly being related in the audio waveform. But I'm going to activate my LFO, and I'm going to turn the LFO up. And as I just hold a note down, we could adjust the filter, and I will adjust the speed. So we'll just all right, and let's say I wanted to adjust the phase, or if I wanted that to start at the top of the waveform or bottom or in the middle, or I wanted to change different shapes. And I will go to a secondary LFO, and let's adjust our panning. So we're going to be able to also have the LFOs that will be completely tempo synced as well. So if I wanted to adjust this to be different musical values, so at this point we're able to kind of adjust based on different musical values. And if you're like a composer, you could actually go up to, we've had to request for people wanted LFOs that could slowly evolve over long periods of time. So we could now just take this and go up to 16 measures or down to like 128th note. So I want to just take one sample. We could take that and just kind of sculpt a very interesting and creative sound. At this point, we could say, and I wanted to apply other processes and effects. So just like any normal audio track in Cubase, I could come right over here and we could open up our channel settings. I could adjust the EQ. And if I wanted to go to my channel strip to have compression or, different saturations, limiters, I wanted a noise gate. I wanted to have third-party plugins or other Steinberg plugins. We could just have kind of all these stored in our channel settings. And now to recall all these settings into a completely different project, at this point I could just come over here and save it as a track preset. So once I save as a track preset in any other project, I could just open that particular sample up and have my go-to sounds quickly accessible. Many times we may be working and you're coming up with different creative ideas. You say, okay, I like this, I like the motion, I like the filters I've done, but what I want is a different basis of the actual sample that I'm started with. So we could click on this little lock icon and let's come over to our different loop libraries here. So I will just say, let's just grab maybe like a vocal sample. So we will come over here.
We don't talk, touches like my guiding.
And I'm just going to drag that over. And what this is going to do is maintain all of the settings that we have created here painstakingly. And you could just keep all the settings and just kind of change the basis of the samples. And just have different variations that will work musically, will work rhythmically with the different sources. So we could do a tremendous amount of creative functions within the particular sampler track, but sometimes we may want to take it to the next level. Maybe we want to create our own instruments. Maybe we want to incorporate this with other Steinberg sample-based instruments. To do that, we could click on the little 3 arrows that point up to the right, and I can now take this particular sound set that I've created within the sampler track, and I could export it directly to Groove Agent to SE, to Halion, where I could make my own instruments and sell them and design instruments with all the graphic elements, into Pad Shop 2 for granular synthesis, or going directly into Backbone, Steinberg's famed kind of drum resynthesizer. So that you could see, a tremendous amount of flexibility. But if we think about all the great stuff that we've seen with just new features in Cubase 11, kind of adding to the already incredibly mature feature set. So if you wanted to be able to double click to erase notes, to say, I want to have better MIDI CC handling, I want to be able to copy, I want to have my Bezier curves, I wanted to work with polypressure, going into pitch bend with it snapping to the grid, to the scale assistant, defining your own scales, to snap live input, to doing all of your pitch, having the editing of the pitch be within the scale, to being able to filter different views of notes having your global tracks, being able to go into your notation to have the same fonts as Dorico, the new inspector and overlays, plus the sampler track adds for a lot of flexibility that you really don't see in other programs that come standard within the Cubase 11 environment.